Guys, welcome to the Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Harper, and today you are in for an absolute treat. You are going to get to meet Mike O'Krent.
In 2011, there was a movie made called Sarah's Key. It was after a book. It was a really good movie. But the last thing that you hear in this movie is the narrator of the movie, who is a character in the movie. She says, when a story is told, it's not forgotten. It becomes something else. The memory of who we were and the hope of what we can become.
Mike is a long-standing friend and supporter of the Ripple. He is one of our mainstays in the pond, our Ripple community. He is running his own online community called Conversation Masters, and he runs a company called LifeStories Alive. And I'm going to let him tell you about it because they have a new direction that they're headed with their business that I think has and brings this very, very valuable service to a wider audience. And I'm super excited to have Mike on because I want you to hear the inspiration behind what he created. I want you to know Mike for who he is because he is infinitely interesting. He is such a good guy, and he is creating ripples that are going to make an impact, a lasting impact for decades to come. Decades, forget decades, generations to come. The work that he does is going to be handed down from generation to generation, no doubt. So I'm super excited for this conversation, and I can't wait for you to meet Mike O'Krent. Mike, welcome to the Ripple Effect Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I am super excited for you to be here because as I said in your introduction, you're one of my favorite people. You are working in a space that is both unique and if I were to think of something that creates ripples for so many people, you are it, my friend. And so I'm grateful to talk about what you've been doing and then this new direction that you're headed with the business because it makes it a little bit more accessible for people on a wider range. But before we dive in, I think a lot of people probably know you because you're, does that make you infamous? I think maybe you could be infamous. I'm not sure.
No.
For those that don't know you, give them a little perspective of kind of who you are and what led you to start LifeStories Alive.
Okay. Infamous. I don't know about infamous because I know, let's see, John Wilkes Booth was infamous. Who else? Any murderer was infamous. So I never want to be that.
Okay, you're famous.
Thank you.
That's okay. Forget it. I used the incorrect word. You are famous beyond measure. That's what I should have said. That's exactly what I should have said.
Thank you.
I apologize. Yeah. I mean, whenever you conjure up John Wilkes Booth, that's a problem.
Yeah. I can think of so many other bad people. But to my background, so you asked me what got me into LifeStories Alive?
Well, a little bit of your background and then what led you to start LifeStories Alive, because I think that's a really interesting approach.
Thank you. Yeah, I was in a different business for 25 years. I'm from San Antonio. I moved to Austin in 1998 and was in the, of all businesses, the retail floor covering business, which has nothing to do with what I'm doing now. And after I left that business, I didn't know what I was going to do. And a business coach helped me connect to something I had done on a volunteer basis in the 1990s. And I'm very, very fortunate to have been trained by what I feel is the best in the world. I interviewed Holocaust survivors for Steven Spielberg's foundation, the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, which is now housed at USC. It's the USC Shoah Foundation. And in that process, I got training on the incredible experience of what it's like to sit across from somebody and just ask questions, importantly, to listen to answers intently and to formulate those questions in such a way that stories come out, in many cases, for the first time in 50 years. And it still gives me a rush whenever I think about that experience. So after 25 years and the other experience, this business coach helped me connect to that. And I'm in my 20th year now of what's called LifeStories Alive, where I make, in a nutshell, I interview moms, dads, and grandmas and grandpas and make a documentary film for families.
I love that. Back us up a little bit. So how was it that you volunteered to do these
Hmm.
interviews in the first place? And many of those ended up in, or at least were the inspiration behind the interviews that actually informed the making of Schindler's List, right?
Actually, many people think that, but
Okay.
while he was filming Schindler's List, in Poland, survivors were coming up and say, "I have a story I want to tell you."
Ah,
That's when,
okay.
in his genius, he came up with the idea that if we don't capture these stories now, they're going to be buried with them.
Yep.
So he started this foundation, I think 1994. I came on in 1995. He started this with the idea of interviewing 50,000 survivors worldwide. We interviewed
Wow.
53,000 in 29 languages all over the world.
Wow.
So now, the way I came into that is I was volunteering at the time with the Jewish Federation of San Antonio. They have a wonderful and still have a wonderful Holocaust education program. So I would go out to high schools and teach kids about the Holocaust. I was one of a 3-day program. The first day they had a film that the kids watched, and whether it was a history class that was studying World War II or an English class that was studying the Diary of Anne Frank, they saw the film day one. Day two, I and other teachers would come in, and it was pretty much a Q&A, but I had a curriculum that I would teach the kids. And then back then, day three, a survivor would come and talk to the kids.
Wow.
And so I'm doing that. Fast forward to about 94, early 95. We didn't solicit survivors at the Shoah Foundation. They called in and asked to be interviewed. So the foundation sent a letter to the Jewish Federation of San Antonio saying, "We're getting calls from your area. Do you know of anybody who wants to volunteer their time and expense to fly to LA to be trained?"
Huh.
And I said, "Oh, me." And I did. And I was it from this area.
Wow. And so what was that like? So you show up in Los Angeles and are you getting a master class by Steven Spielberg himself or his team, or what was that like?
I came within one trip to LA. I came within 2 hours of meeting him, so I've never met him.
Oh,
But he hired the best in the world, the best historians on the Holocaust, really good communication people to teach you how to sit and what to do and what not to do when you sit across from somebody and
mhm.
emotion comes out, and things like that. How to formulate the questions, a little bit of history about what happened then. So no, I was trained by other people to do that, but it was a pretty intense 3 full day training, and I think your words are correct. It was like a master class on not only the Holocaust, but how to how to sit across and be the catalyst that causes these stories to come out.
Yeah. Was the experience when you were going through that training, was always the intent that you were just going to, at that point, you were just going to volunteer your time to go interview these Holocaust survivors? Was the intent to send you back to Texas and seek them out around here, or were they sending you to parts unknown, or how did that program sort of unfold once you went through the training?
Good question. The Federation got the letter because there were calls coming in from Austin and San Antonio and South Texas.
Okay.
So again, we didn't solicit survivors. So I was sent. The way that worked is when a survivor would call the Federation, call the foundation, the Shoah Foundation, say, "I want to be interviewed." Then a regional director from there would send a letter. Back then, there was not email, I don't think. So they would send a letter to me, literally, and say, "Here's the person. Here's their phone number. Here's their contact estimate. Follow the protocol," because there was a definite step-by-step protocol that we took. Call them, schedule this, and we'll get the videographer scheduled with you, and we'll coordinate it, and that's how it works. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah. No, I've always meant to ask you that question after you went through the training. If you were,
Mhm.
if you just did those interviews in and around Texas, or if they sent you around the world to do
Yeah,
these
yeah.
interviews or had those opportunities. I know through your work now with Life Stories Alive, you've been able to go almost everywhere, right? To be able to tell the stories that you are so gifted at telling. But as you were starting out in this process, I'm really curious, like as a newbie, right? Going through the training and getting sort of comfortable about how to sit across from someone. These are highly emotional conversations. I've got to expect. And I think probably I would think a lot of those that even though they may have raised their hand and volunteered to be interviewed, still revisiting much of that experience and that time in their life, there's quite a bit of unpacking that has to happen. And you have to have a certain delicacy in terms of how you go about asking, the questions to get them to open up. What was that process like, especially since that wasn't your formal training at that point?
Correct. I had no background in journalism or anything like that. Again, he hired the best of the best. So the process that we took and the path that we took them through their lives, it was mandated. And again, this is genius. When people think of the Holocaust, they just think about the time during World War II in the camps, right? 20% of our interview with these people had to be before the war. So they wanted to paint the picture of what it was like
Yeah.
in Eastern Europe, in Germany, and Poland, and all the Hungary, and all these places before the war. And it was much like it is here.
Hmm.
Life is good. This is how always happened. Then 20% of it was after the war too. Okay, you've survived. The war is over. Now what do you do?
Yeah.
And most people have no idea. What did they do? Where did they go?
Yeah.
Their homes were destroyed. Their family was murdered. What do you do? And so that was part of it. So I say that to say this: the path that we took them through was a chronological interview from earliest memories on through. And when you're doing that, you're going to get emotion, as you
Sure.
mentioned. So they taught us, what do you do and your role as an interviewer when somebody starts to cry? And I take that teaching to what I do now on a regular basis. And your people who are listening to this podcast should take that teaching to when they deal with their family and
Yep.
somebody gets emotional, because it's brilliant. And here's what it is. If you want to hear it, you want to hear it?
Yes, definitely would want to hear it.
Here are the 3 rules if somebody you're talking to gets emotional. Number 1, be quiet. Shut up. Say nothing. It's going to seem like it's lasting a very long time. It's not. But in the meantime, just be quiet. Rule number 2, don't hug them, don't touch them, because that's an interruption. You don't want to interrupt their emotion. I'm a hugger, and you pat somebody on the shoulder. That's an interruption. You don't want to do that. And number 3, never, ever, ever say, I understand, because you don't. Even if they're talking about something that you were with them when that happened, you don't know what's going through their mind at that
Right.
time. So you shut up, you don't invade their personal space, and you just wait for it. And never say, I understand, and never say anything, quite frankly. Just wait. Again, it's going to be uncomfortable at first. What always comes out at the end of that emotion is the pearl and the essence of who they are. They'll say something that has really been deep and is who they are. And it's a beautiful thing, quite frankly. And I encourage your listeners to try it with your kids, try it with your spouse. And most of us just aren't good at shutting up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If we just be quiet.
Well, I got to ask, I mean, in those early days during those initial interviews, how hard was that for you? Because I do know you to be, you're very much like me, right? It isn't that we're reaching out to have physical contact with another person because we're uncomfortable, but we like to be fixers, right? That's kind of the way of a lot of good, connected, heart-centered individuals, is that you don't want to see somebody going through angst or pain, or you want to try and solve, uncomfortable emotion if you can. And so I got to imagine that you sitting there when one of these first experiences happens, did you have to sit on your hands in order to make sure that you were remembering the rules that had been laid down for you? Or did you find that wasn't as challenging as I might think it might be?
Oh no, it was challenging. I tell you, it was rough, but it didn't take too many into it. I'll never forget the very first one. It's incredible. She lived in San Antonio. She lived and she didn't have much money. She lived in an apartment. She was a nurse during World War II. Um, and her stories were amazing, but she started crying, and I'll never forget. I had to tell myself, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, be
Yep.
quiet, be quiet. Just watch, because you're listening not just with your ears, you're listening with your eyes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I forgot to mention earlier is, well, how will you know when to engage? When they make eye contact.
Hmm.
Until they make eye contact with you, you be quiet. And so, yeah, it was tough at first for me to practice what I learned. But when you see how effective it is, when you see how it really bonds you with the person that you're having the conversation with, you remember it for the rest of your life.
At this point, counting that project and what you've done with Life Stories Alive, how many folks have you interviewed, do you think? If you had a,
Ooh,
you probably know the
uh,
number, right?
well, around the Holocaust survivors were around 30,
Okay.
but the Life Stories Alive, and it's hard for me because there's some projects that I did for nonprofit organizations where I interviewed many people. In fact, I've got one going on right now where I'm going to be interviewing about 15 people. So the answer is hundreds, but I don't know the exact number, quite frankly.
Is so going back to the 30, right? So you did it 30 for this particular aspect of the project. Was there an opportunity? Was that just because there were only 30 in the area, or were other people also kind of dividing and conquering and doing? I think you said you were the only one that responded to the training and went out there. So I assume you were kind of the go to person. Was that just there weren't that many survivors or people that had were aware of the project at the time, or was there a limit that they assigned you to do it when you were doing the project?
There was no limit. I would have done a
Okay.
lot more, but remember, they had to call in and volunteer to be interviewed. And I was the only one just in Central Texas and South Texas. So I interviewed one in Corpus Christi, and I interviewed one outside of Lexington, Texas, but a lot in San Antonio and Austin. Um, but no, there weren't any more. There were many more survivors in the area, but they didn't call the foundation to say, I want to be interviewed. And worldwide, there were about 1,100 of us from the number that I heard,
Wow.
1,100 interviewers that accomplished these in many different languages, in many different countries, that accomplished these 53,000 interviews.
So for the 1100, do you stay in? Do you guys have like a reunion? Do you do any type of group to stay connected to the other interviewers? Because I got to think this is an incredibly bonding experience, right, for the
Oh, yeah.
individual, but also just the stories that could be shared across,
Yeah.
the various experiences that each of the interviewers may have had.
It's incredible that you asked that because there's only 2 that I have ever connected with because, again, I
Wow.
was the only one in the area, so there was no one else in the area. Linda and I, my wife and I went to, on a trip up and down the Danube River in the year 2000. And when we were in, Budapest, Hungary, I found out who the interviewer was in charge at Budapest, and I was able to meet her. She was really nice, very cool.
Oh,
But I haven't met anybody else who was and one other guy that just happened to be in some networking event. He found out who I was. We had this conversation. He says, "I interviewed in Phoenix," and I'm thinking, "Oh wow, cool." But
that
other than
yeah.
that, no.
That's kind of well. I mean, I think it's probably a pretty personal experience. I think it's got to be I would think a life changing experience based on what you went through. How did you make the leap from working on this special project to starting Life Stories Alive? Was it a big leap of faith at that point, or was it, oh, I feel like I've got the chops, I can do this? Because you are one of the best conversationalists I've ever met. Yeah, I told everybody in the intro,
Thank
obviously you've got conversation masters. You're teaching people to be better, more effective communicators. You always struck me as someone that I could talk to for hours, or I may not see you for a year, and we'll pick up exactly where we left off the last time we had the conversation. And I credit you for that because you're so gifted at engaging people with very thoughtful questions, very heart centered approach to engaging another human being. And you are an absolute master at it. But was that once you got going and you've done these 30, it's like, yeah, I think if I don't go into broadcast news, I might do this for myself.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Steve. I really appreciate
Sure.
it. To answer your question, after 25 years in a different business, I didn't know what the hell I was gonna do next. I didn't. So I went to a business coach who helped me connect. He helped me connect with, and I had no idea what I was gonna do, literally. And he helped me connect with how much I loved interviewing the survivors. Uh, it and you might have to cut this out, but I'll try to make the long story short.
No,
So
you're
I hired
good.
this business coach to find out what I was going to do next, right? And we have a couple of meetings, and then he says, "Okay, between now and next week when we meet, I want you to make a list of things that you've done that have to fall into both of these categories. Number one, that you thought you were good since you were an adult, you thought you were good at, and number two, that you liked doing."
Hmm.
So I spent 25 years in the retail carpet business. If you thought you were good at selling carpet but hated it, don't put it on the list, right? So you get the idea, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So I show up the next week and I've got about 20 or so things on the list. So I sit across from him and he's got a notepad and he said, "Read each one slowly." Okay.
Mm.
So I look at my list and I say, being a father, being a husband, doing this, doing this, doing this, doing this, doing this. And I go down the list. And I finish, I look at him, he says, "Reread this, this, and this." 3 things. Okay. So I reread this, this, and this. And I looked at him, I said, "What's going on here?" He said, "The 2 times that you've said interviewing Holocaust survivors for the Shoah Foundation, you light up. Why?" And I went on, as I'm doing right now, to tell him how much it gives me chills. Because you're sitting across from somebody and they're telling you stories they've never told anybody for 50 years.
Wow.
And then after I finally shut up, he was a good listener. After I finally shut up, he said, "Can you make a business out of doing something like that?" And that's when the light bulb went on. I had a process that I could duplicate. In Austin, in most metropolitan areas, there's a plethora of very talented videographers and
Yeah.
editors because I knew I didn't want to do those 2 things. And I bootstrapped it and started right then. The first interview that I did was at the end of December 2005.
Wow.
So the
Okay.
business was formed in January 2006. So this is my 20th year.
And I don't know if you remember that year, but that was one of the first times that I knew that you'd be a huge supporter of mine. We met at a Starbucks on Anderson Lane, long table. Somehow you had agreed to be a part of this little project that I was working on because I was in conversation with the Starbucks executive team in Seattle about the possibility of changing their cups at the time to actually create, rather than just little factoids, which is what they were doing, or little quotes, actually do utilize that space on their cup as an opportunity to have conversation. And so we sent everybody out to do, conversations. We had every table tense and everybody had like open for conversation. And you were the most positive. Everybody else looked at me like I had just, swallowed a bug, but you were like, I could just see it. You were just like licking your lips. I don't think we lasted very long. I think they called every store and shut us down pretty quickly, but you were one of those people that had such an enthusiasm for it. And I remember you were so kind when you called and you're like, "I don't think it went the way you wanted it to, but I did meet like 1 or 2 really interesting people, and I had some good conversations, and a few other folks that had volunteered had gone to different locations and had done the same." And he said, "But what you said at the time really impacted me." You said, "I think you're onto something because there is such a loneliness factor that people are desperate to look at something curious like a table tent that says open for a conversation, and they want to ask about it." And that we're talking, like you said, way before internet, right? I mean, stuff was just coming out, but at the end of the day, certainly no social networks. Nothing like we experience today. But it was just such a really impactful point in time for me because you said lean into that, right? You're good at starting conversations. You're good at using questions and getting to know people. And you said, it takes one to know one, because I feel like I'm pretty good at it too. And as you were kicking off your business, that it just stuck out to me.
That's cool. I have totally forgotten how we originally met. That's a great story. And I appreciate you saying that, because I totally forgot that. It was soon after that you came out with The Ripple Effect, which I have on my shelf right here, right?
Yeah. Well, the book had been out, but I think you found it. And then we did like a kind of like a little relaunch at like the first 6-month anniversary, which would have put us in like April or May of that year. But that first edition was back then. So yeah, it came out in 2005, September of 2005.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
and
what a
we
great
had
story.
originally done the 8-minute ripple as a means to get people to talk in a very
Mhm.
non-networky way, right? And I think the reason you and I sort of always kind of gravitated to one another is we knew the magic. If you can get somebody to open up, and you have good questions that lead them down the path to tell you a story, it's pure magic, which is obviously what you experience every time that you get an opportunity to work with the clients that you serve. So maybe tell us about the magic you create through Life Stories Alive.
At the end of there in 2011, there was a movie made called Sarah's Key. It was after a book. The movie didn't do great at the box.
Yep.
It was a really good movie. But the last thing that you hear in this movie is the narrator of the movie, who is a character in the movie. She says, "When a story is told, it's not forgotten. It becomes something else. The memory of who we were and the hope of what we can become."
Ooh.
So the experience of me sitting across from somebody and they are able to, and most of the people that I interview, most, not all, are older, and they experience something that I call the chill of the sigh.
Ooh.
And, we've gone through, imagine we've gone through a few hours of the interview, and it's all done in one day, right? A few hours of the interview. At the end of the day, at the end of the interview, there's a few questions that I ask, and one of the questions is, the only question I tell them that I'm gonna ask is the last question, because some people like to prepare for it, right?
Yep.
And the last question is, "Do you have any closing comments to leave for future generations?" So they answer that. Then I say, "Thank you for sharing your life stories with us." And invariably, I see this, and
Really.
literally it gives me chills because they know that their legacy and their story is captured forever.
Yep.
And that gives me such a rush because, again, just like the Shoah Foundation interview, just like this Holocaust survivors, all I did was ask questions and listen, but I'm the catalyst that does that. And it's just a joy for them to do it. And the reactions that I get from my clients, who are usually children, are fun too, because the most common thing that I hear from them is, "I've known this person all my life. I've never heard that story."
Yeah.
And which is cool for me. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know, that's a
definitely.
long answer to a short question, but thank you.
No, and it's a beautiful answer because at the end of the day, what a gift. I mean, not only are you giving that individual the gift of being able to tell their story or share these important stories from their life that may never be told again, but you're providing that as the ongoing ripple for generations to come that may want to know their great 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 grandmother, right? And these things have
Yeah.
lasting power. When I did your intro before you came on today, I said, you are making ripples that will last generations. For you, that has to be the most invigorating part of your work, is to know that you start a ripple today and it's going to ripple through that family, it's going to ripple through their close friends, and you know even maybe distant relatives today in the here and now. But 5, 10, 15 years from now, it'll be rippling again, and it'll ripple beyond that and beyond that. And
Mm.
the ripples that you create, the rings just become infinite, because what you're doing is being able to really give voice to someone who in not too distant future will no longer be here, to be able to ask those questions or to be able to have that experience of hearing their voice and to seeing and feeling the emotion behind the words that they share. And that's just absolute gold in my opinion.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons why I use video,
Yep.
because, when I do a life story, I call it a living story, and a living story involves, our senses. People write books about their lives, their biography, and that's great. But imagine, and I want you to imagine right now, Steve, and each one of your listeners right now. It's probably a not politically correct question, but did you have a favorite grandparent?
Yeah.
Now, I'm assuming that grandparent is gone, dead, right?
Yes.
Now, if you can imagine, whenever you want, on your computer or on your TV, You pop in and you get to hear the voice. You get to see their facial expressions as they're telling their story, as they're smiling and giggling about how they met their soon-to-be wife, or when they were a kid when they got into trouble, because those are some of the stories that we cover.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I ask if they were a parent, and your viewers can use this because it's a question that nobody asks, but I think it's so powerful. Describe, and I want you to answer this right now, Steve, right? You're a father, right? You have kids?
Yep. Oh yeah.
Describe how it felt to hold your firstborn in your arms for the first time.
Uh, a huge sense of relief because my first son was born dead, actually. In all honesty, we did not think he was going to make it. My wife had had a relatively uncomplicated pregnancy. The day that she went into labor, things just weren't moving as quickly as they needed to. Ironic was that her doctor, the day we went into the hospital, was the last day she was going to be around on service because she herself was about to have a child. And we went the whole day expecting Zach to show up and never did. And we got pushed to a backup and went from, we're just going to wait this thing out. We're going to, give her some drugs to move it along to they came in and did a test. Very, we were clueless, right? We didn't know what was going on. And, I think I had gone to get us something to eat and we're eating and they come in and it was as if, the room exploded. They needed to get her prepped for a C-section. She was going to have a natural birth. And next thing I know, they whisk her off to the operating room. They, gown me up. I go in there and they said, he had ingested merconia, I think, basically a bowel movement in the womb, and it can be fatal. And they needed to take him now. And so they got him out, and he was, I just remember how dark the body was. It just didn't look like a baby at all. And they worked on him. And my wife was in and out because they rushed her for the surgery. And I just remember one of the doctors coming and saying, you need to go with the baby. But it doesn't look good and doesn't look like he's going to make it. And so, I didn't know what to do. I went into their NICU and I said, well, he comes from good stock. So he's got to make it. He'll make it. And I have no idea how that happened, grace of God. But I think within about 15 minutes, he started pinking up, and I did not get to hold him for a full day, but I sat there for a night and part of the next day with my pinky in the little, incubator, and he reached up and grabbed it. And I don't think he ever let go. And that was our first introduction. So it wasn't holding him in my arms necessarily, but it was a memory I will never forget. And to this day, he's the fighter, and there's no quit in that kid. And everything he's ever accomplished, it's because I think, he starts feeling like he's already behind, and, that he's got something to prove. So he's always had a chip on his shoulder, and that's just, that's who it is, and that's who he's become. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear, but there you go.
Thank you for sharing that. What an incredible story.
Yeah.
And, well, they say, of course, I always ask questions. You know me, Steve.
Yep. Yeah.
That leads, there's an expression, Steve, that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Is that fighter just like his father?
Oh yeah, I think so. I was the youngest of four. My next closest siblings, 10 years older than me. None of them liked me. My parents didn't really they probably shouldn't have had kids, to be honest with you, let alone four. So I was this mistake child. So I always felt like my back was against the wall the entire time growing up. And I did everything I could to outperform anybody and everybody. So it's, tied into how I played soccer from that perspective to virtually anything I tried. I had to be the best at it because I was always told that I would be the worst or, insignificant. So I was going to prove it out to the world. I think that fight is in my son. My wife's tenacity, however, I think is probably more ingrained in him, and that he is. Uh, I think he has her never give up. There's always a way. Have faith. Believe. So I'm really grateful to have a partner that has that and instilled that in both my boys, but especially Zach.
Your story, especially about your early childhood, makes me think, that's why Steve is such a damn good rippler, is because he just loves people and he wants to be surrounded by good people, which you are. And you
Yeah.
know the value of what one relationship and what one ripple. Well, and the idea of ripple is just perfect. You drop a pond into the water and watch the ripples go further and further out into places that you never knew.
Yeah.
And you get that and you teach that. Wow, that's so cool, Steve. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I appreciate you even bringing it up. I think I was not that way in school. I was a loner. I tried to stay off the radar. I had lots of friends from a lot of different groups, if you will. I could be friends with just about anybody, but I was really good at being friends with a lot of people, but not a good friend to any one person, right? So I had very
Mm.
small social circle, and I just ended up doing a career coaching session for someone that I went to high school with, who was just absolutely murderous to me in high school, just an absolute jerk, and just always treated me so poorly and went out of his way to make my life a living hell. And to have him come back, 40 plus years or whatever, right? To be able to say, look, I've been following what you're doing. And, we connected at a reunion, but, I didn't go out of my way because, I have a long memory. But to have him come hat in hand and say, I actually need some help. And I think you're the only one that can get there or get me where I need to go. It reminded me that, maybe I didn't realize I was dropping the pebbles in that pond so many years ago, but maybe there was one and it stuck. But that could have been the reason that he was so unkind and cruel to me, because of the way that people responded to what I did and how I didn't, I'd step up to the plate to do anything I could for anybody. And that just manifested tenfold when I became an adult and had the means to do so.
Such a great story.
I
Here
appreciate.
I'm laughing because here I am interviewing you. It's your damn show. You should be. I mean, you're interviewing me. I should shut up. I'm going to shut up, Steve, and let you ask
Well,
some
yeah,
questions.
you
I'm
ask
sorry.
such great questions, and that's the beautiful thing I think about our friendship is I learn something about you every time that we get together, and you're so thoughtful in what you ask that you always ask enough questions to give insight to whoever you're visiting with, and participating in Conversation Masters. I don't get to do it as often as I would like, but the times that I have, the way that you seed those conversations with such thoughtful topics and subjects and conversations, it is no doubt that you're super successful at what you do and how you do it. You make it so darn easy to have a conversation and feel like you could share just about anything with you. And that's a true
Yeah.
talent. That's a rarity for a lot of people. I have a lot of good people that I know that I would qualify as like super ripplers, right? Very few would be at your level because you have a way, and I think it's how you
Thank
show up, it's your presence. But the thing that you said, and I think it comes from one of those three letters or three rules, which is when to be quiet, and you know how to hold space without words or without rules or regulation. You just set it in motion and you make it easy for, just like I had no intention of sharing what I shared with you right then and there, but you do that in such a gifted way that I think that that's why people are so easily drawn to you and so open to sharing what there is to share. Because a question is just a question, and there is always going to be some story, but it's the power and the emotion behind the story that's where you get the life story. That's where you get the good stuff. And I think that you are a benefactor of so many masters along the way that have shared so many things, good and bad, about their lives and how you get a front row seat to that experience as they're reliving it and they're retelling it. And then you're getting an opportunity to present it and be the steward of those stories to cast that forward for for their families, next generations, which I think is amazing.
Thank you, Steve. I greatly appreciate that. And you're reminding me that one of the things that we teach in Convo Masters, but one of the things that most people are really bad at is listening. And it's the skill that I'm always improving because we can never quit improving our
Nope.
listening skills. And there are some great books out. I have some behind me that we teach from. I'm going to show you one book, if I may.
Okay.
I don't know if I read it. And I encourage your listeners to read this book because it's so well written. The subtitle is "The Power of Keeping Your Mouth Shut in an Endlessly Noisy World," and the title of the book is STFU,
Yep.
and it means FU.
Yep.
And the titles of the chapters are STFU at work, STFU at home, STFU in love. Chapter 2 is SIFTO, shut it the F off. And they're talking about these devices and how we
Yep.
should shut them off to really have good conversation. Anyway, um, I appreciate your compliment, but yeah, if we could all become better listeners, the world would be a better place, I think.
Absolutely. And that is, like you said, that is one of the most important skills to work on, no matter where you are, what age you are, what experience you have. Finding an avenue to get some deep dive experience and understanding what that is, it will serve you in such a huge, huge way. That is an excellent book. I've read it, reread it twice. You recommended it to me the first
Oh,
time.
cool.
But it's an amazing, amazing book, and it's a great reminder, right? Why am I talking? And why am I still talking are two rules that I kind of have constantly going in my head all the time, because it's a good way to filter. You got to hold space for the other person to be comfortable, to share, to have dialogue and conversation. And I'd be remiss if we didn't cover this, but tell us about, so you have Life Stories Alive has involved you going out one-on-one with a crew to do these interviews. It's a logistical challenge for you to go from these locations. It's not inexpensive to do it. And then you've got hours upon hours of coverage that you have to come back, you have to edit, and then you offer the final product. But you've recently added a new approach to your service to make it a little bit more widely accessible for folks.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Yeah, for 20 years now, I've done a do it for you business, but now I'm offering to do it with you business. So you're not alone in the journey. In fact, I've crafted this to where you get to do the fun part and I get to do the harder work. And here's what it involves. In some cases, let's say your dad might say, I don't want any stranger coming and talking to me about this stuff, but I'll talk to you.
Yep.
So you get to do the interview. But what I do is I offer my guidance through it with many hours of working with you. I send you a copy of my book that I wrote in 2017, A Conversation You'll Never Forget, a guide to capturing a life story. So you get the guide, you get my pre-interview questionnaire, the same one that I use when I do these life stories. You get the interviewer checklist. You get, I send you in a box, lav mics, two lav mics, a stand for your smartphone, a light so you can light it up really, really nice. And the huge things are my editor will edit it for you. So you don't have to mess with any of that, which is
Oh, that's
pretty
awesome.
cool. And I also send you 201 questions that I've come up with that I use on a regular basis. So I help you with all of it, but you still get to do the fun part.
That's
And
cool.
if you may know this, I've given a TED talk before, a TEDx talk, and in the TEDx talk, I include the idea of what happens if you don't do it, because, and I'll tell you what the story is briefly. On May the 16th of 1997, my grandfather died, and as his casket was lowered, I watched his stories being buried with him.
Yeah.
I knew better. I was interviewing Holocaust survivors at the time. And if you would have told me at his funeral that within 2 months my dad would be gone, I would have said, "You're crazy."
Yeah.
But 1 day short of 2 months later, on July the 15th of
Wow.
1997, my dad was dead, and the same thing happened. And I never want anyone to have to go through that,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
sound of their voice, I can kinda hear it in my head, but what I wouldn't give to be able to see them telling their stories.
Yeah.
And that's why I do what I do. Um So no one will ever have to go through that themselves.
Yeah. I mean, and what a driver for the mission of the business. And I think it's a good reminder to anybody that those family members that won't always be guaranteed to be here, you want to capture those stories now because you'll regret it if you don't. And they'll be such a gift to go back to and for future generations to be able to learn and hear these stories and to hear their voices and the passion behind what they're saying. I think is just, it's so invaluable. So Mike, how do people get access to the service?
They can visit my website designer is doing a website for Life Stories in a Box right now. But in the meantime, you can go to lifestoriesalive.com, and there's a contact page where you can fill out the contact page, and that'll get to me. Or I don't
Okay.
mind giving you my email address, provided that your listeners aren't the spammers that I get all the time.
No,
So
we don't have any spammers in our group. I don't think so.
I'll send you a link to my
Perfect.
email address and my phone number. Feel free to call because I want people. I want to help people walk through this and do it themselves. And the cool thing about Life Story in a Box, you don't have to do it in one day. In fact, you can do it in little bits at a time because all of us are doing it anyway.
Yeah.
When we go to mom or dad's house, when we go to grandma's house, we sit there and they tell stories. And these cell phones that we have, all you have to do is turn on voice memos and you're
Yep.
recording it forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's power in that. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's how you can contact me, and I'd be happy to give you that information.
Okay, fantastic. We will definitely share your contact information in the show notes. We're also going to share a link to your TED Talk. Mike, I always like to finish up with just a couple of questions. Hopefully you don't mind, a couple of ripple-oriented questions. What is the most surprising thing that you've learned about yourself through this process of hearing other people's stories?
The most surprising thing?
Yeah.
That people will open up and tell me these things about their lives that they never tell anybody else.
Yep.
I'm thinking, oh my God, I pinch myself because I'm thinking, who am I? And the answer is, I'm just somebody who listens.
Yep.
I'm just somebody who asks questions, and it's not when they answer a question, it's not moved to the next question a lot of times, it's clarifying questions. It's, "Tell me more. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by this particular word?" It's just yeah, I have to pinch my and that surprises me sometimes because I never used to be that way.
Yeah.
Ask my wife, right?
Well, you've kind of been an entrepreneur your entire life, but this was a big this
Mm.
this was a big chance that you took in order to create this business. What has been the biggest lesson that you've learned in doing this type of business? Because it's very, I think probably a lot, once you got it going, you probably got a lot of word of mouth. You probably got a lot of referrals, but starting that from scratch, I got to
Mm.
think your wife had to think you were a little bit crazy going from what you did do, which was probably a little bit more predictable income to, this thing. What did you learn through that process? What was something that you took away through that initial entrepreneurial experience?
I have to laugh at first because I start this business and, I'm a few months into it, and my mom says, "Michael, don't you think you should get a real job?" Go, "Mom, come on." But to answer your question, in science and experts start with why. If the why is strong enough, you get through it. You get through the tough parts. You get through the struggle. And there was a struggle at first. As a matter of fact, not too many people know this, but in the first few months, income was tough.
Yeah.
And so I put on an orange apron and I worked at the floor covering department at Home Depot in Round Rock for a while after I started this business for a few months until I got it going. And then it just happens. But the why was I need to do this because it just not only selfishly feels so good, but the value it brings to people. And as you mentioned, the ripples that it will cause for future generations of people I'll never meet.
Yeah.
It's just too good. So find your why, whatever it is to your listeners, find your why, make sure it's meaningful to other people, including yourself, but mostly to other people, and then go for it.
I love that. I love that. What is one piece of advice you give to somebody out there who maybe isn't a good conversationalist, or they just have never had a good perception of themselves in conversation, what advice would you give them to give it a try and get started? Whether it is going through this process of uncovering the life story of a loved one, or just getting better at engaging with your coworker at work or with your boss, or being a contributor somehow in your community. What piece of advice would you give somebody about becoming a better conversationalist?
One of the things that I was taught that I think is the best piece of advice that I ever got regarding listening is the following. The next thing you say has to include at least one word from the last sentence that they say, which means the following. Number one, the pause that you generally had, if you had any pause before you started speaking, the pause is going to be a lot longer. Why? Because you don't know if it's the last thing that they say. And number one, you're going to listen more intently because you don't know if it's the last sentence. So you're going to listen more intently to what they're saying. And at first, that little exercise is going to seem awkward. And it did for me for a long time. But after a while, it becomes routine, and that will immediately make you a better conversationalist and certainly a better listener. So longer pauses. And, the title of that book, too, is important, STFU. The more we just sit back and listen. And the other piece of advice too, and it's a fun thing to do, when you're around other people, whether it's a networking group or wherever you are, family gatherings, for a while, just sit back and watch people have a conversation with each other. It's a fun thing for me to do because you realize how lousy people are at conversation. They're gonna interrupt each other. They're gonna, and you see their face. You watch with your eyes as much as with your ears. I mean, you listen with your ears, but you listen with your eyes as well. And there's another expression that we use in Combo Masters. I speak too much. It's volumes are spoken in silence. So let that pause happen and then watch what happens during the pause. Volumes are spoken in silence. Body language is huge in conversation, and no one really pays much attention to it. Why? Wow. Because they're so concerned about what they're saying rather than what is being heard. And people want to be heard, meaning they want people to understand. And the only way to do that is to shut up and listen. I'm blunt, but sorry.
And no, that was excellent. I mean, you touched on it. Shut up and listen, which I'm using your exact example, right? Using this in my next phrase and statement. But if you're focused on the words that are coming out of the other person's mouth, you're not as concerned about what you're going to say next. When you can shut up and give yourself the time and space to process what you're hearing, you're going to be more engaged and involved in that conversation. I did an interview yesterday. A lady, it's going to be a great, it's going to be a great episode for us. She's got a great book that, she's very, very excited about. And she's done a ton of podcasts, and her, we'll call it agent, whatever, PR person was really, really, they contacted me because somebody had told them about my show. They listened and paid attention and said, this is kind of show I want to be on, but they're very much controlled about how they wanted to do it. And I said, I don't give questions ahead of time. And I kind of see where, the conversation leads us, and that sort of informs me in the minute. And she told me yesterday after we got done that we actually did 2 recordings. She's doing something special for me as well. And she said, I got to be honest, when, my Kate, I think's her assistant, when she told me that, it made me very, very nervous because I didn't know if you're going to shoot from the hip or you're not prepared. If I'm going to be the one that has to carry the conversation. I've had to do that so many times. And she said in that first podcast experience, she's like, I didn't want it to end. It was so great. It was just like we were a long lost brother and sister. And she said, when we started, I really didn't get that vibe. I didn't think that. And then your first thoughtful follow-up to what I said. And she said, and I spoke way too long and I said way too much right out of the gate because I was nervous. And you instantly put me at ease. And so when she said she came back to do this, she's like, when you asked me to do it, it was an easy yes. But she said, one of the things that I don't feel like people ever are good at is actually listening in the moment to see where that conversation can go. Every interview's got a scripted structure or approach, and they go through the motions, but they don't actually care what's being said on the other side of the mic. And what you just said there really makes a lot of sense, because I feel like that's a skill set that I've had to adapt and get better at. But at the end of the day, I feel much more congruent and authentic that way. I'm sure you do as well, because you're not worried about, oh, I got to make this point and this point, and I got to be sure to put this in. You're actually listening for that final word or sentence so that you can build off of it. And that's what it is. A dialogue is a build process. It's a puzzle that we're putting together without really any direction, but we're figuring out how the pieces fit together. And if you do it right, absolute can be magic. But whether it's a 5-minute conversation or it's an hour-long podcast, like, this episode.
Listen to what she said, because that means you should know that you're a good conversationalist too. And in this podcast and in any podcast, we really need to take a compliment in.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, and I'm not good at that.
That's
You've actually
either.
taught me that.
You're welcome. When somebody gives you a compliment, what do? Here's what you should do: say thank you and then shut up.
Yep.
Because what most people do is say thank you. Yeah, but it was a team effort.
Justify
Anything
it. Yep.
Say after the thank you might deflate. Right. Exactly.
Takes all the power away.
So anyway.
Yeah. No, thank you for that reminder. And that's much, much appreciated. Well, listen, I have 2 last questions for you. And this is only because you're so amazing at how you frame everything. When you hear the words, the ripple effect, what does that bring to mind for you? What does that conjure up?
The visual. I'm a visual person of the pebble going into the pond and the ripples going out. And that's the visual effect. But then in the work that I've done, I've seen what the connections can be made to future generations, to grandchildren. If there's 3 generations now, that's what I think about the ripple. In my TED Talk, you'll find out a little bit about my mom. And I know that I have 2 grandbabies now. Grandbabies. One's 9 and one's 6, so they're not babies anymore. But my granddaughter and grandson will now know my mom, who has since passed.
It's awesome.
And they will now know her. And that's the ripple effect. But thank you for the question. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. And it's a great answer. And, now everybody's going to, be excited to see the TED Talk for sure. Last question. What ripple can I look to create for you?
I think you've already created it in this podcast. What the challenges of being an entrepreneur in my particular field is that people have no idea what it is that I deliver. So there's nothing to compare it to. So they don't know how much it costs, and they think it costs a lot more than it does. Just to let you know, there's a guy in Chicago and a guy in LA, a firm in LA, and I call them and I say, this is what I do. Do you do something like that? Yeah, we do something like that. How much does it cost? Well, we start at $80,000 up there. I'm thinking, good Lord, I'm not charging enough. But what I do is not inexpensive. The ripple that you can do for me, Steve, is to let people know what you've done in this podcast. If people think that it's way expensive, but now I have an offering that's a lot less expensive, that might be more fun, and they're a little bit more involved, but they're not on their own.
Yeah,
it's like it's like you have Michael Phelps guiding you how to swim. Not that I'm a Michael Phelps, but
I was going to say, I think you might be the Michael Phelps. I affectionately call you the Tony Soprano of Austin. So not because you're a mafia guy, but just because you run things. I mean, everybody knows you. Everybody, forget about it. But yeah, I think I think the pivot in the business model is fantastic, because I think it does give people an opportunity to get the best of both worlds. They get to go through the experience of doing it, but they get to be guided by a master like yourself. And I think that's phenomenal. So no problem. I will share that. We will shout that from the rooftops everywhere.
Cool.
All right.
Danke.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the time today, Mike. You are one of my favorite people in all the world. You're doing great work. You are creating ripples that are going to last for generations. And I'm just proud to call you a friend. So thank you so much for everything you do. Guys, we'll be back with another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. But until then, Mike, ripple on.